Hello and welcome to the executive branch. Let's get started. So our learning objectives for this unit will be to analyze the roles and responsibilities of the three branches of government to understand how they function and interact. We're also going to look at the changing power relationships between the three branches of government over time. And we are going to describe and give examples of how the constitutional principle of checks and balances limits the powers of our government and our leaders. So starting off with learning target 1, remember when you're taking notes, which I know all of you are, you never have to include the learning targets in your notes. So the first thing we want to look at, of course, is the presidency, because when you think of the executive branch, that's like the first thing that pops into your mind, right? The president is like the numero uno, wrong word. Anyway, numero uno, whenever you're thinking of the executive branch. So requirements for office. We've already talked about this, but just to kind of review with you. There are 3 formal requirements. You have to be at least 35 years old. You have to be a natural-born citizen of the United States, and you also have to be a citizen of the United States, resident of the United States for at least 14 years prior to being elected. Now, there are also some informal requirements that aren't listed in the Constitution. So things that citizens of the United States might look for in a president, in addition to those formal requirements. So I want you to think about those. So the term of office, of course, presidents serve 2 terms or a total of 10 years, and that's because of the 22nd Amendment. So each presidential term is 4 years, okay? So you can be president 2 times unless you were a vice president for someone else and then that person died and then you have to take over it. So just like review a little bit in your notes about what the 22nd Amendment is, and if you have any questions, ask me in class. So elections, we have 2 different elections that we use whenever we are talking about the presidency. Okay, we have the primary elections, and in August, every 4 years, the state of Missouri holds our primary elections. So we have, that's basically where all of the Democratic candidates who are running are kind of like in an election, and then all of the Republican candidates that are running are also in an election. And we narrow down the choices. And the purpose for that is, can you imagine if we had, like, if you think of the Democratic candidates for 2020 right now, we've got like at least 5 sitting U.S. senators. Could you imagine if all 5 of them were campaigning for president? What would that do to the Democratic base? Okay, just think about that. We'll talk about that more when we get to the Electoral College. And then we also have, of course, the general election. And according to the Constitution, well, according to federal law, which later, which was adopted a little bit later. I'm going to move myself for you. Every 4 years, we have our election, and it's going to take place on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Okay, so why do we not just say the first Tuesday in November? Well, way back in the day when we had to set that requirement that we were going to have elections on this day, the first day of the month could be kind of like a busy day for people, especially if you're like a business owner, if you're someone that has to reconcile accounts from the previous month. So making it on the first day of the month is probably not going to be a good thing. And there were a whole host of other things that went into helping to make that decision. But on this calendar, and I totally just made this up, we'll say this starts with Sunday. So there's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So the first Tuesday would actually be the first Tuesday after the first Monday, and that would be November 3rd. So that would be election day. Okay. All right. Next, I'm going to move myself again. Come on. There we go. All right. So salary and benefits. The president makes $400,000 a year, okay? So $400,000 a year to you and I seems like a lot of money. But whenever you think about the fact that we are basically paying this person to run arguably the most powerful nation in the world, $400,000 is kind of like chump change, okay? Let's be real. So he also gets a couple different expense accounts. He also has, of course, the White House that he and his family can live in. You also have Air Force One. You have a few different really nice limousines that you can ride in. But all of those things are part of the president's benefit package. So then we want to look at the line of succession. And we've talked about this briefly in class, but the 25th Amendment actually wasn't the 25th Amendment, of course, tells us that if something happens to the president, the vice president actually becomes president. He's not just like the acting president or the fill-in or whatever. But the 25th Amendment wasn't ratified until like the 1960s. So with that comes this presidential line of succession. So what do we do if something happens to both the president and the vice president? Then what? Do we just have another election? Do we just kind of all agree to be good and hope for the best? I mean, what do we do? So the presidential line of succession is over here, and I'm going to switch tabs for you. So switching here. Nope, it's not going to switch. Anyway, presidential line of succession. So there are a whole bunch of different positions, and I will share this link with you so you can have it for yourself. But we have the Speaker of the House, the President pro tempore of the Senate, then the Secretary of State, Treasury, Defense, Attorney General, and all of the cabinet level positions. So we just recently had the State of the Union address. One member of the president's cabinet, one person from this line of succession, known as the designated survivor, was not in attendance at the State of the Union. Why? Well, just in case something happened, there would still be one person there to kind of pick up all the pieces and lead our government. So the presidential line of succession has been used in other cases, not just like in the death of a president. If a president has to like undergo surgery or something during his time as the leader of the United States, then his vice president kind of fills in until he is able to, take over again. So for example, when Ronald Reagan was president, he was actually shot a few times in the chest by an attempted assassin. So fortunately, he survived that attack, but while he was recovering, he wasn't able to fully execute his responsibilities as president of the United States. So his vice president, George H.W. Bush, stepped in and kind of was his substitute, acting as president until he was able to resume his responsibilities. And there's a picture of our current president, President Trump. All right, and with that, I am going to stop on this video. So if you guys have any questions, be sure to let me know.